Ask any surviving 8th Air Force veteran which bomber they wanted to fly, and you'll get the same answer, delivered with the same dismissive shrug. The B-17, not the other one. Boeing's Flying Fortress had the looks, the mythology, and the marketing. Crews painted nose art celebrating it, generals posed in front of it, and newsreels loved its habit of limping home with half a wing missing. Consolidated Aircraft's B-24 Liberator got none of that affection. It got a nickname instead, the Flying Coffin. One exit, buried near the tail, virtually unreachable if the aircraft caught fire in the nose or cockpit. A hull that split apart on water landings instead of skimming gracefully like the Fortress. A silhouette so slab-sided and joyless that crews joked it looked like the crate the B-17 had been shipped in. Consolidated's chief designer, Isaac Ladden, had built something faster, longer-ranged, and capable of hauling a heavier bomb load than Boeing's celebrated aircraft. On paper, the Liberator outperformed the Fortress in nearly every category that mattered. In the mess halls of England, none of that mattered at all. What mattered was survival, and word among the crews was that the Liberator did not forgive mistakes. By the time the Liberator reached squadron service in 1941, it had already been judged, and the verdict wasn't close. It was homely. It was twitchy. It was, in the words of more than one B-17 crewman, something you flew if you drew the short straw. Nobody in that mess hall in 1941 had any idea that this ugly stepsister would end up doing more of the war's dirty work than the aircraft they idolized, and doing it in greater numbers than any bomber ever built. The source of the Liberator's reputation sat in plain sight on its wingtips. Consolidated had adopted the Davis wing, a slender, high aspect ratio design with almost none of the forgiving thickness of the Fortress's airfoil. The physics were undeniable. Less drag, more lift per square foot, a genuine leap in range and cruising efficiency. The Liberator could fly farther, carry more, and do it while burning less fuel per mile than its rival. The cost of that efficiency showed up the moment something went wrong. The thin wing stalled sharply and with little warning, punishing pilots who treated it like a forgiving trainer. Loaded with fuel out to the tips, it was also unusually exposed to battle damage. A handful of well-placed rounds could sever a fuel line and turn the wing into a torch. The fuselage, optimized for speed and payload rather than structural overbuilding, had an unfortunate habit of shedding pieces when cannon shells found it. None of this made the aircraft fragile in any absolute sense. It made it a machine that punished carelessness far more severely than the tank-like Fortress did, and pilots noticed. What the mess hall gossip conveniently ignored was the other side of the ledger. That same wing let a Liberator haul its bomb load nearly 1,000 miles farther than a Fortress could manage and land back at base with fuel to spare. It could climb faster fully loaded, cruise faster at altitude, and reach targets the Fortress simply could not touch. The aircraft crews dismissed as poorly built was, in fact, precisely built for a mission nobody at the airfield bar had fully understood yet. Total war fought at global range. That mission revealed itself over gray water, far from any bombing raid over Germany. In 1942 and early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic hinged on a stretch of ocean south of Greenland that no aircraft based in Britain, Iceland, or Canada could reach. Allied planners called it the Mid-Atlantic Gap. German U-boat commanders called it something closer to home turf, the one place their wolf packs could hunt convoys without fear of aircraft dropping out of the clouds. The Liberator closed it. Stripped of unnecessary weight, fitted with extra fuel tanks and radar, the very long-range Liberator variants flown by RAF Coastal Command and American squadrons out of Iceland and Northern Ireland could patrol nearly 1,000 miles further out to sea than any other Allied aircraft. For the first time, the entire North Atlantic convoy route fell under continuous air cover. The U-boats did not adapt well to being watched. Convoy losses, which had spiked to catastrophic levels in the first months of 1943, collapsed within weeks of the gap closing. German submarine losses climbed just as sharply. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, would later describe May 1943 as the month his force lost the initiative in the Atlantic permanently. The aircraft that made that possible was not the glamorous Fortress droning over Germany in tight combat boxes. It was the homely Liberator, flying long, lonely patrols that never made a newsreel, sinking submarines nobody at home would ever hear about. The ugly aircraft had just helped win the one battle that, had it been lost, would have starved Britain out of the war entirely. If the Atlantic showed what the Liberator could do quietly, Romania showed what it could do at catastrophic cost. On August 1st, 1943, 177 B-24s took off from airfields near Benghazi, bound for the oil refineries at Ploiesti, source of nearly a third of the fuel, keeping the German war machine running. The plan called for something almost nobody had attempted with heavy bombers: a low-level attack, flying in at treetop height to slip beneath radar and improve accuracy against a target defended by some of the densest anti-aircraft concentrations in Europe. It went wrong almost immediately. Navigation errors sent one formation toward the target from the wrong direction, straight into the teeth of defenses that had not been alerted to expect an attack from that angle. Liberators crossed the refineries at little more than 50 feet, flying through smoke, flame, and a wall of flak so dense that crews described it as flying into a solid object. 53 aircraft went down. Over 300 airmen were killed, more captured or interned in neutral Turkey. What came out of that carnage was extraordinary, even by the standards of a war full of extraordinary acts. 5 medals of honor were awarded for the mission, more than for any single air action in American history, 3 of them posthumous. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker held his burning aircraft on target rather than break off, dying with his crew moments after releasing his bombs. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Hughes pressed his attack with fuel streaming from a punctured wing, dying attempting to save what remained of his crew after the bomb run. The Ploiesti raid did not cripple German oil production the way planners had hoped. The refineries were back near full capacity within weeks. But it proved something about the aircraft and the men who flew it that no amount of mess hall mockery could undo. Whatever the Liberator's structural reputation, the men climbing into it that morning had not needed a sturdier airframe to display the kind of courage that gets remembered for a century. The story of how the Liberator won the argument its reputation kept losing was written not over Europe, but in a Michigan cornfield. Ford Motor Company, applying the assembly line logic that had built millions of automobiles, converted its new Willow Run plant into the largest aircraft factory the world had ever seen, a building over 3,000 feet long that workers nicknamed, with the era's typical understatement, the mile-long building. The early results were embarrassing. Ford's engineers, used to a car changing model years, not subassemblies, choked on an aircraft whose blueprints kept shifting mid-production. Charles Sorensen, the Ford executive who had promised Washington a bomber an hour, spent 1942 explaining why Willow Run was nowhere close. Then, through 1943 and into 1944, the bugs worked themselves out. By April 1944, the plant was turning out a completed Liberator every 63 minutes, around the clock, 7 days a week, built substantially by a workforce that had never assembled an aircraft in its life, much of it female, recruited straight off the farms and out of the cities of wartime Michigan. Ford alone built nearly 7,000 Liberators. Combined with Consolidated's own plants and 2 other manufacturers building the aircraft under license, total production reached over 18,400 airframes, more than any other American military aircraft in history, more than the beloved Fortress by a comfortable margin. The Liberator flew with every branch of the American Armed Forces and with air forces from Britain to Australia. In the vast distances of the Pacific, where the Fortress's shorter range was a genuine liability, the Liberator became the default heavy bomber, striking targets the Fortress could never have reached and returning home on the fuel it had left over. The aircraft nobody wanted to fly had become the aircraft nobody could do without. Here is the detail that the mess hall verdict of 1941 never accounted for. When the statisticians totaled up the losses after the war, adjusted for the number of sorties each aircraft actually flew, the proportional loss rate for Fortress crews came out higher than for Liberator crews, not lower. The airplane that had earned a nickname built on fear of not making it home brought a smaller percentage of its crews to grief than the one celebrated for toughness. Reputation and reality, it turned out, had been running in opposite directions the entire war. None of this rewrote the folklore. The fortress kept its nose art and its Hollywood cameos. The Liberator kept flying, in greater numbers, on longer missions over water nobody else could patrol, largely uncelebrated by the culture that its crews were dying to protect. It sank submarines that never made headlines, hauled bomb loads across oceans. The fortress could not cross, and rolled off an assembly line in Michigan faster than any aircraft in human history had ever been built before. There is a particular kind of American irony sitting at the center of the Liberator's story. The aircraft the crews trusted least turned out to be the one that came home most often. Built in numbers no other nation on Earth could have matched. Flown by pilots and factory workers who had never expected to be remembered for anything. Quietly deciding a war that history would go on to credit to prettier machines.